The small town of Willow Creek whispered about Eleanor Grayson long before she became the talk of its dusty streets. At 70, she was the kind of woman who seemed to carry the weight of decades in her steady gaze. Her silver hair tied back in a loose bun. Her hands weathered but graceful. They called her Miss Ellie, a term of endearment laced with pity. Poor Miss Ellie, they'd say, living alone in that creaky old house. Too old to know better. They thought her mind was soft. Her days spent tending to her garden or knitting by the fireplace. They thought she was harmless, oblivious to the world of money and power that churned beyond her picket fence. They were wrong. Eleanor had heard the whispers for years. At the bank, the grocery store, even the church potlucks. People spoke as if she couldn't hear or worse, as if she wouldn't understand. She's too old to know money, they'd mutter when she paid in cash, counting out exact change with deliberate care. Probably keeps it under her mattress. They'd joke, smirking at the thought of her naivety. But Eleanor listened. She always listened. And she remembered. Her life hadn't always been this quiet. Decades ago, Eleanor had been a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing firm in Chicago. Sharp as a tack, her ledgers flawless. She'd left that life behind after her husband, Thomas, passed, returning to Willow Creek to raise their daughter, Clara, in the house her parents left her. Clara had grown, moved to the city, and built a life of her own, leaving Eleanor to her garden and her memories. But the mind that once balanced corporate accounts never dulled. It lay dormant, waiting. The trouble started with the developers. Willow Creek, once a sleepy farming town, had caught the eye of a real estate conglomerate, Horizon Ventures. They wanted to turn the rolling fields into a sprawling suburb strip malls, cookie-cutter houses, the works. The townsfolk were divided. Some saw dollar signs. Others saw their heritage bulldozed. Eleanor's property, a modest 2 acres with a century-old oak, sat on the edge of the proposed development. Horizon wanted it badly. They sent a slick young man named Daniel Carver to her doorstep with a smile as polished as his shoes. "Miss Grayson," Daniel had said, leaning casually against her porch railing, "we're offering a fair price for your land. More than fair. Really. You could retire comfortably. Maybe move somewhere warm. Florida. Perhaps." His tone was kind, but his eyes betrayed him sharp. Calculating. Assuming she'd jump at the chance. Eleanor tilted her head, her expression soft, almost vacant. "Oh, my," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "That's an awful lot of money. I don't know much about these things. Let me think on it, dear." Daniel's smile widened, certain he'd sealed the deal. She offered him tea, which he declined, and he left with a promise to return. She didn't trust Horizon, not because of their suits or their shiny brochures, but because of the numbers. Eleanor had a knack for numbers. Always had. She'd overheard Daniel at the diner, boasting to a colleague about how they'd lowball the old-timers and flip the land for triple the profit. She'd seen the contract they sent, buried in fine print that would leave her with less than half what her land was worth. They thought she wouldn't notice. They thought she was too old to know money. For weeks, Eleanor played the part. She'd nod blankly when Daniel visited, asking simple questions like, "Will I have to move right away?" Or, "Is this a good deal, Mr. Carver?" Each time, he'd pat her hand, call her ma'am, and assure her she was in good hands. She'd smile, offer cookies, and watch him leave, her mind already turning. At night, she pored over the contract in her kitchen, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She cross-referenced property values, zoning laws, and development plans she'd quietly requested from the county office. She made calls to old contacts in Chicago, accountants, lawyers, even a former colleague who now worked in real estate. They were surprised to hear her voice, but they listened. Eleanor had always been persuasive, her quiet confidence disarming. By the end of a month, she had a plan. Her first move was subtle. She invited Daniel back, serving him tea. This time he accepted, thinking her softened. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice frail. "Maybe I could sell, but I'd need a little more. For Clara. You know." She mentioned a figure just above their offer. Enough to seem naive, but not so high as to scare them off. Daniel's eyes lit up. He thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that Eleanor had been talking to her neighbors, the ones Horizon was also pressuring. Most were older, like her, wary of change, but unsure how to fight it. She didn't lecture them or reveal her full hand. Instead, she asked questions, planted doubts. "Did you read the part about the taxes?" She'd say casually over coffee. "I heard developers sometimes hide fees." Slowly, the neighbors started asking their own questions, delaying their signatures. Eleanor's plan hinged on time. Horizon was on a tight schedule: permits, investors, deadlines. If she could stall them, she could force their hand. She began attending town hall meetings, sitting quietly in the back, her knitting needles clicking softly. When the floor opened for comments, she'd stand, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm just an old woman," she'd say, "but I worry about what this will do to our town. Has anyone checked the environmental impact?" The crowd murmured, and the council, caught off guard, promised to look into it. Daniel grew frustrated. His visits became more frequent, his tone less patient. "Miss Grayson, this is a once-in-a-lifetime offer," he said one afternoon, pacing her porch. "You don't want to miss out." Eleanor blinked up at him, her eyes wide. "Oh, I'm just so confused by all this," she said. "Could you explain the tax part again?" He sighed, launching into a rehearsed spiel, while she nodded, hiding her amusement. Behind the scenes, Eleanor was building a coalition. She reached out to a local lawyer, Margaret Tate, who'd grown up in Willow Creek and shared Eleanor's distrust of outsiders. Margaret was young, sharp, and hungry for a cause. Together, they dug into Horizon's history: lawsuits, shady deals, environmental violations. Eleanor funded the research with her savings, never flinching at the cost. "This isn't just about me," she told Margaret. "It's about all of us." By the time Daniel returned with a revised offer, Eleanor was ready. She invited him in, set out her best china, and listened as he pitched a slightly higher price. She leaned forward, her hands folded, and said, "Mr. Carver, I've been thinking. I'd like to propose something different." For the first time, Daniel looked uneasy. Eleanor's kitchen was warm, the scent of chamomile tea lingering in the air as she faced Daniel Carver across the table. His polished demeanor faltered, his fingers tapping nervously against the contract he'd brought. She'd caught him off guard with her words, and she savored the moment. For months, she'd played the fragile old woman, letting him underestimate her. Now, she was ready to shift the game. "Mr. Carver," she said, her voice steady now, no trace of the quiver she'd used before. "I've been doing some reading. Your company's offer is generous, but I think we can do better for everyone." She slid a folder across the table, its edges worn from her late-night work. Inside were documents she'd compiled, property appraisals, market analyses, and a proposal she'd drafted with Margaret's help. Daniel's eyes narrowed, but he opened the folder, scanning the pages. "What is this?" he asked. His tone clipped. "A counteroffer," Eleanor replied, her gaze unwavering. "My neighbors and I have been talking. We're not selling our land individually. We're forming a cooperative. If Horizon wants our properties, you'll deal with us as a group and at a fair market value." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I've calculated it. It's 3 times your current offer." Daniel laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. "Miss Grayson, with all due respect, you're out of your depth. This isn't how it works. You can't just, can I?" She interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "I've spoken to every homeowner on this side of Willow Creek. We've agreed to hold out unless you meet our terms. And I've got a lawyer who's very interested in your company's history of underpaying sellers." She leaned back, folding her hands. "You're not the only one who can do research, Mr. Carver." The room felt smaller, the air charged with tension. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, flipping through the folder. Eleanor had included everything: comparable sales data, zoning regulations, even a report on Horizon's failed project in a neighboring county, where they'd been sued for environmental negligence. She'd spent weeks gathering it, calling in favors from old colleagues and spending late nights at her kitchen table. She'd even taught herself to navigate the county's online records, her fingers slow but determined on the keyboard. Daniel closed the folder, his smile gone. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Horizon doesn't negotiate with collectives." "Then Horizon doesn't get our land," Eleanor said simply. "We're not in a rush. Can you say the same?" She knew she'd hit a nerve. Horizon's investors were impatient, their permits tied to a tight timeline. Every delay cost them money. Eleanor had learned this from a contact in Chicago, a retired banker who still had ears in the industry. She'd also learned that Daniel was under pressure to close deals quickly or risk his job. He stood, gathering his papers. "I'll take this to my team," he said, his voice cold. "But don't expect miracles." Eleanor smiled, offering him a cookie from the plate between them. "Take your time, dear," she said, slipping back into her frail old lady act for just a moment. He didn't take the cookie. After he left, Eleanor called Margaret. "It's done," she said. "He's rattled. Now we wait." The waiting was the hardest part. Willow Creek buzzed with rumors. Some said Eleanor was crazy, others that she was a genius. Her neighbors, emboldened by her resolve, began to trust her. They met in her living room, a group of retirees and farmers, their faces lined with worry but also hope. Eleanor explained the cooperative, keeping her language simple but clear. "If we stand together," she said, "we have power. They can't pick us off one by one." Not everyone was convinced. Old Mr. Jenkins, who owned the farm next door, grumbled about the risk. "What if they walk away?" he asked, his voice rough. "I could use that money, Ellie." "They won't walk away," she said. "They need our land more than we need their money. Trust me." She wasn't entirely sure they'd hold firm, but she projected confidence. She had to. Doubt was contagious, and she couldn't afford to lose them now. At night, alone, she wrestled with her own fears. What if she'd miscalculated? What if Horizon called her bluff? But then she'd think of Clara, of the home she'd built here, of the oak tree where Thomas had carved their initials. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. Days turned into weeks. Daniel didn't return, but Horizon sent letters, each offer slightly higher than the last. Eleanor and Margaret reviewed them carefully, rejecting each one. "They're testing us," Margaret said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They're getting nervous." Eleanor nodded, but her heart raced. She was gambling with her neighbors' futures, not just her own. She spent her days visiting them, listening to their concerns, reinforcing their resolve. She brought homemade jam to Mrs. Carter, who was wavering, and helped Mr. Jenkins fix his fence, talking strategy while they worked. Slowly, the cooperative grew stronger. Then came the breakthrough. Margaret burst into Eleanor's kitchen one morning, waving a letter from the county. "They've delayed Horizon's permits," she said, grinning. "Environmental concerns." "Your questions at the town hall," they listened. Eleanor felt a rush of relief, but she kept her composure. "Good," she said. "Now we push harder." She organized another town hall meeting, this time inviting a local journalist who'd been sniffing around for a story. Eleanor spoke again, her voice stronger now, no longer playing the frail widow. "This isn't just about our land," she said to the crowd. "It's about our town, our history, our future." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Eleanor felt the tide turning. Daniel called the next day, his voice tight. "Miss Grayson, we need to talk." The meeting was set for a crisp autumn morning at the Willow Creek Community Center, a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and old wood. Eleanor arrived early, her gray coat buttoned tightly against the chill, a folder of documents tucked under her arm. Margaret was already there, setting up chairs, her energy infectious. The cooperative, now officially named the Willow Creek Land Trust, had grown to include 20 homeowners, their properties forming a critical block in Horizon's development plan. Today, they'd face Daniel Carver and his boss, a man named Victor Langston, Horizon's regional director. Eleanor had done her homework on Langston. He was ruthless, a deal closer with a reputation for bulldozing opposition. But he wasn't invincible. Margaret had found a crack in his armor, a recent lawsuit against Horizon for coercive tactics in another town. Eleanor planned to use it. The room filled with neighbors, their faces a mix of determination and nerves. Mr. Jenkins sat in the front row, his arms crossed, but his eyes on Eleanor, trusting her lead. Mrs. Carter clutched her purse, whispering to her sister about the rumors of Horizon's latest offer. Eleanor stood at the front, her posture straight, her silver hair catching the light. She didn't feel 70 today. She felt alive. Daniel and Langston arrived last, their suits stark against the room's faded walls. Langston was older than Daniel, his hair graying at the temples, his smile practiced but cold. He shook hands with the council members, ignoring the homeowners. Eleanor watched him, her expression neutral, but her mind cataloged every move. "Let's get started," Langston said, taking a seat at the table set up for negotiations. His voice was smooth, commanding. "Horizon Ventures appreciates your enthusiasm, but let's be realistic. Our offer is more than fair for this town. You won't get a better deal." Eleanor stepped forward, her folder open. "Mr. Langston, we've reviewed your offer," she said, her voice clear. "It's not enough. Our land is worth more. And we know it. She slid a document across the table, her updated appraisal, backed by data from 3 independent firms. We're asking for 5 times your current offer, plus guarantees for relocation assistance and environmental protections. Langston's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Mrs. Grayson, is it? He said, leaning back. I understand you're protective of your home, but this is a business matter. You're not equipped to handle these negotiations. The room tensed. Mr. Jenkins shifted in his seat, and Mrs. Carter gasped softly. Eleanor didn't flinch. I've been handling my own affairs for 50 years. Mr. Langston, she said, and I've read your company's history. Like the lawsuit in Marion County, where you pressured elderly sellers into signing unfair contracts. Should we discuss that? Langston's eyes narrowed, but Daniel jumped in, his voice sharp. That's irrelevant. We're here to talk about Willow Creek, not rumors. It's not a rumor if it's public record, Margaret said, standing beside Eleanor. She handed Langston a copy of the lawsuit, highlighted sections marked in red. The room buzzed with whispers. Langston skimmed the document, his jaw tight. This is a stunt, he said. You're delaying progress for everyone. Progress for who? Eleanor asked, her voice rising. For your investors. Or for the people who've lived here for generations. She turned to the crowd. Her neighbors. Her allies. We're not just selling land. We're protecting our home. If you want it, you'll pay what it's worth and you'll do it fairly. The room erupted in cheers. Langston's face reddened, but he held up a hand. Fine, he said. We'll review your proposal. But don't think you've won. After the meeting, Eleanor's neighbors swarmed her, their gratitude spilling over. You showed him. Ellie. Mr. Jenkins said, his gruff voice warm. Mrs. Carter hugged her, tears in her eyes. But Eleanor knew it wasn't over. Langston wouldn't back down easily. That night, she sat with Margaret at her kitchen table, the folder spread out between them. They'll try to divide us, Eleanor said. Offer some people more. Scare others into signing. Margaret nodded. We need to keep everyone together. And we need leverage. Eleanor thought of Clara. Her daughter had called earlier, worried but proud. Mom, you're taking on a giant, she'd said. Be careful. Eleanor had smiled, promising she would. But careful didn't mean timid. The next week was a blur of strategy. Eleanor and Margaret met with each neighbor, reinforcing the cooperative's unity. They drafted a formal letter to Horizon, outlining their demands and threatening legal action if the company tried underhanded tactics. Eleanor even reached out to the journalist, who published a piece on the Willow Creek Rebellion, as she called it. The story spread, catching the attention of environmental groups and local politicians. Horizon's permits remained stalled, and the pressure mounted. Then came the counterattack. Daniel showed up at Eleanor's door, alone, his face drawn. Miss Grayson, he said, we're prepared to offer you personally double our original price. Cash. No strings. You could walk away. Let the others fight it out. Eleanor studied him. He was desperate, his job on the line. For a moment, she felt a pang of sympathy. Was young, caught in a machine bigger than himself. But she shook it off. Mr. Carver, she said, I'm not selling out my neighbors. You should know that by now. He left without another word. And Eleanor knew the real fight was coming. The air in Willow Creek grew heavier as winter approached. The fields dusted with frost and the town buzzing with tension. Horizon Ventures hadn't backed down, but their tactics had shifted. Instead of public offers, they sent private letters to Eleanor's neighbors, each one tailored to exploit personal weaknesses. Mr. Jenkins got a letter promising enough money to cover his medical bills. Mrs. Carter's offer included a clause for a new home closer to her grandchildren. Divide and conquer, Eleanor thought. She'd seen it coming, but it still stung. She called an emergency meeting of the Willow Creek Land Trust at her house. The living room was packed, the air thick with worry. They're trying to break us, Eleanor said, standing by the fireplace, her voice steady. They think we'll turn on each other, but we're stronger than that. She looked at Mr. Jenkins, who stared at his hands, and Mrs. Carter, who clutched her letter like a lifeline. I know it's tempting, Eleanor continued, but if we sell separately, we lose everything we've fought for. Mr. Jenkins looked up, his eyes tired. Ellie, I'm not as strong as you. My heart's acting up. And the hospital bills. His voice trailed off. Eleanor crossed the room and knelt beside him, her hand on his arm. We'll find a way, she said softly. Together. She turned to the group. If anyone needs help, we'll figure it out. But we can't let them scare us into giving up. Margaret took over, outlining their next steps, a formal complaint to the state's real estate board, citing Horizon's coercive tactics, and a petition to designate their land as a historic district, which would block development. The neighbors nodded, some hesitant, but most resolute. Eleanor felt a swell of pride. They weren't just fighting for money, they were fighting for each other. The next blow came unexpectedly. A week later, Eleanor found a notice taped to her door, a lien on her property for unpaid taxes. Her heart sank. She'd always paid her taxes on time, her bookkeeping meticulous. She called the county office, her hands shaking as she dialed. The clerk, apologetic, said there'd been a mix-up with her records. But the lien was real. She'd need to pay thousands to clear Ida risk losing her home. Eleanor knew this wasn't a mistake. Horizon had connections, and they were playing dirty. She called Margaret, who arrived within the hour, her laptop open. Together, they traced the lien to an obscure county regulation, one Horizon's lawyers had likely exploited. They're trying to scare you, Margaret said. You're the linchpin. If you fold, the cooperative falls apart. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. Then we fight harder. They worked through the night, drafting an appeal to the county and gathering evidence of her tax payments. Eleanor's old bookkeeping skills came alive, her ledgers organized with precision. By morning, they had a case, and Margaret filed it with a contact at the state attorney's office. But the lien was a warning. Horizon was done playing nice. The town was splitting. Some residents, swayed by Horizon's promises of jobs and growth, turned against the cooperative. At the diner, Eleanor overheard whispers calling her selfish, stubborn, an old woman standing in the way of progress. She kept her head high, but the words cut deep. She thought of Thomas, how he'd always believed in her. You've got a mind like a steel trap, Ellie, he'd said. She clung to that memory now. Clara came to visit, her face lined with worry. Mom, this is getting dangerous, she said, sitting at the kitchen table. They're targeting you. What if they do something worse? Eleanor poured tea, her hands steady despite the fear gnawing at her. I can't stop now, she said. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Clara reached for her hand, and for a moment, Eleanor felt the weight of her daughter's love, grounding her. The turning point came at the next town hall. Horizon had rallied their supporters, filling the room with unfamiliar faces likely paid to show up. Eleanor suspected. Langston took the podium, his voice booming. Horizon Ventures is committed to Willow Creek's future, he said. But a small group, led by Mrs. Grayson, is holding this town hostage. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others glaring at Eleanor. She stood, her heart pounding but her voice calm. Mr. Langston, you talk about the future. But whose future? Yours. Or ours? She held up a copy of the lien notice. You've tried to bully us, to lie about our taxes, to scare us into selling. But we're not afraid. We're not selling cheap. The room exploded, some in boos, others in cheers. Eleanor didn't waver. She spoke of the cooperative, of the land's history, of the oak tree where her husband's initials still stood. When she finished, the room was silent, then erupted again, this time with applause. Even some of Horizon's supporters looked shaken. That night, Margaret got a call from the journalist. The story had gone national, picked up by a major outlet. They're calling you the silver-haired strategist, Margaret said, laughing. Eleanor smiled, but her mind was already on the next move. The national spotlight changed everything. Willow Creek, once a forgotten dot on the map, was now a symbol of resistance. Reporters camped out at the diner, interviewing anyone who'd talk. Eleanor's face appeared on news sites, her silver hair and steady gaze a stark contrast to Horizon's polished executives. The headline read, 70-year-old widow takes on corporate giant and she's winning. Eleanor didn't care for the attention, but she knew it was power. Horizon was reeling, and she wasn't about to let up. The cooperative grew bolder. With Margaret's help, they filed a class action lawsuit against Horizon, alleging predatory practices. The state's real estate board launched an investigation, and the lien on Eleanor's property was quietly drop-proof. She thought that Horizon's influence wasn't absolute. But the fight was far from over. Langston was furious, and Eleanor knew he'd come for her next. He did, in a way she hadn't expected. One evening, as she tended her garden, a black SUV pulled up. A man stepped out, not Langston or Daniel, but a stranger in a suit, his face unreadable. Mrs. Grayson, he said, his voice low. You're making powerful enemies. It'd be a shame if something happened to this lovely home. He didn't elaborate, but the threat was clear. He left a card with no name, just a number. Eleanor's hands trembled as she tucked the card into her pocket. For the first time, she felt truly afraid, not for herself, but for her neighbors. For Clara. She called Margaret, who urged her to go to the police. This is intimidation, Margaret said. We can use it against them. The police were skeptical, citing no direct evidence. But the incident lit a fire under the cooperative. They rallied around Eleanor, their resolve hardening. Mr. Jenkins, once wavering, now stood firm. They don't scare me, he growled, clutching his cane. Mrs. Carter organized a neighborhood watch, her fear replaced by defiance. Eleanor was their anchor, and they weren't letting her go. She doubled down, working with Margaret to leak the threat to the press. The story exploded, painting Horizon as bullies preying on the elderly. Public opinion turned sharply against them, and their stock dipped at a small but satisfying blow. Eleanor knew it wouldn't end the fight, but it bought them time. Then came the olive branch. Langston requested a private meeting. Just him and Eleanor. No lawyers. She agreed, but only on her terms, her house, her table, Margaret present. He arrived alone, his arrogance muted. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, sitting stiffly, "you've made your point. Let's end this. Name your price." Eleanor studied him. She dreamed of this moment, but it wasn't enough. "It's not just about money," she said. "You've tried to take our homes, our history. You threatened me. Why should I trust you now?" Langston leaned forward, his voice low. "Because you've won. We'll meet your cooperatives, demands full market value, relocation support, environmental guarantees. But we need this deal closed." Eleanor didn't trust him, but she saw an opportunity. "We'll consider it," she said. "But we want it in writing. And we want a public apology for your tactics." Langston's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The cooperative met that night, debating Horizon's offer. Some wanted to take it and move on. Others, like Eleanor, wanted more assurances that Willow Creek's character would be preserved. They voted to negotiate, with Eleanor and Margaret leading the charge. Over the next week, they hammered out a deal. Horizon would pay 5 times their original offer, fund a community trust for local projects, and preserve a portion of the land as a public park, including Eleanor's oak tree. The contract was signed in the community center, the same room where Eleanor had faced Langston months before. The neighbors cheered, some crying, others hugging. Eleanor stood quietly, her heart full but heavy. She'd won, but the cost: sleepless nights, fear, the weight of leading lingered. Clara flew in for the celebration, wrapping her mother in a fierce hug. "You did it, Mom," she said, tears in her eyes. "You showed them." Eleanor smiled, but her thoughts were on the future. The money would secure her neighbors' lives, fund scholarships, rebuild the community center. But she knew this was just one battle. There'd be others, new developers, new threats. She'd be ready. That night, she sat under her oak tree, the moonlight casting shadows over Thomas's carved initials. She traced them with her finger, feeling his presence. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered. The wind rustled the leaves, and she took it as a yes. The dust settled in Willow Creek, but the town was forever changed. The deal with Horizon Ventures brought wealth to the cooperative. But more than that, it brought pride. The Willow Creek Land Trust became a model for other small towns fighting corporate overreach. Eleanor Grayson, once dismissed as too old to know money, was now a local legend. Her name spoken with reverence at the diner, the church, the post office. She didn't care for the fame, but she cherished the unity it forged. The community trust funded new projects, a renovated library, a youth center, scholarships for local kids. The park, named Grayson Oak in her honor, preserved her beloved tree and became a gathering place for festivals and quiet evenings. Eleanor walked there often, watching children play where she'd once feared bulldozers. It felt like a promise kept to Thomas, to her neighbors, to herself. But the victory wasn't without scars. Some neighbors had moved away, their trust in the town shaken by Horizon's tactics. Others struggled with the newfound wealth, unsure how to manage it. Eleanor helped where she could, teaching basic budgeting to those who asked. Her old bookkeeping skills a quiet gift. She never flaunted her role, but people noticed. They'd stop by her house with pies or flowers, small tokens of gratitude. Clara visited more often, her city life taking a back seat to time with her mother. "You're a force, Mom," she said one afternoon, sitting on the porch. "I always knew you were smart. But this..." She shook her head, smiling. Eleanor laughed, brushing it off. "I just did what needed doing," she said. But Clara saw the truth. Her mother had rewritten the rules. Proving age was no barrier to power. Margaret stayed in Willow Creek, opening a small law practice focused on protecting rural communities. She and Eleanor became close, their age gap irrelevant in the face of shared purpose. They'd meet for coffee, plotting ways to keep the town strong. "You're not done yet, are you?" Margaret teased one day. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Not by a long shot." The national attention faded, but the story lingered. A documentary crew came through, filming interviews with Eleanor and her neighbors. She spoke plainly, her voice steady, emphasizing the cooperative over herself. "This was never about me," she said on camera. "It was about us." The documentary won awards, and Willow Creek became a pilgrimage site for activists and scholars studying grassroots resistance. Eleanor's life settled into a new rhythm. She tended her garden, knitted by the fire, but now she also mentored. Young people sought her out, eager for advice on everything from finance to fighting City Hall. She listened, her patience endless, her insights sharp. She never told them what to do, just asked the right questions, letting them find their own way. One spring morning, a letter arrived from Daniel Carver. He'd left Horizon, starting over in a smaller firm. "You taught me something," he wrote. "I underestimated you, and I paid for it. Thank you." Eleanor read it twice, then tucked it away. She didn't hate him been a cog in the machine, like she'd once been. She hoped he'd learned. As the years passed, Eleanor's health slowed, but her mind stayed sharp. She wrote a memoir, not for fame, but for Clara, for the town, for the record. Titled "They Said I Was Too Old." It was published quietly, sold at the local bookstore. It wasn't a bestseller, but it inspired those who read it. A young woman from a neighboring town wrote to her, saying, "You made me believe I could fight, too." On her 75th birthday, Willow Creek threw a party at Grayson Oak. The park was alive with music, laughter, children chasing fireflies. Mr. Jenkins, now friendlier but smiling, raised a glass to Eleanor. "To the silver-haired strategist," he said, and the crowd cheered. Eleanor blushed, waving them off, but her heart swelled. That night, alone under her oak tree, she thought of the journey. She'd been underestimated, threatened, doubted. But she played their game and won not for glory, but for love of her home, her people. She looked up at the stars, feeling Thomas's presence, and whispered, "We did it." Her legacy wasn't the money or the park. It was the courage she'd sparked in others. The proof that no one is ever too old to change everything.